Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Okay, welcome back. This is Addie here. Thank you so much for listening to and sharing the podcast so far. We're about 6 months in. In fact, I think today, when I'm recording this, is technically the 6-month anniversary of launching the podcast. So that is pretty exciting. That's pretty cool. I do want to get to our topic pretty quickly today. So I'm not going to give a whole bunch of updates, but I will give you a quick highlight, which is the Moved to Meditate class library, in case you didn't know that this resource exists. The class library is my collection of online classes, and we have a really nice, easy to navigate platform that I think is fun to use. And there's well over 100 practices that you can access there. There are guided meditations of different types. There's lots of mindful therapeutic yoga classes and gentle yin yoga classes. The membership is really affordable, and there's an option to subscribe to just the library, the pre-recorded stuff, or to that, and to participate in the live classes that I teach too. So if you like the podcast and the kinds of things that we talk about here, and you're looking for practices that reflect that, may I suggest that you go check out movedtomeditate.com, which is the class library. So that is the word from our sponsor today. And with that, we'll move right into the content of our episode today. So this is a sequel today to an earlier episode I did called So You Think You Can't Meditate, Part 1. And that came out in February. It was episode 23. And it covered some of the basic obstacles that come up when you want to meditate, but that, you find you're kind of like not getting traction in the practice. And so that included things like finding the right position to practice in, how long to practice for, certain expectations that we commonly hold about what meditation is supposed to look and feel like. So if you haven't heard that one and any of that sounds like it might be kind of where you're at with meditation, you are welcome to go back and listen to that one. I think you'll find some useful things. But today I wanted to go into a special challenge, that of meditating with pain. And I also want to talk about meditating with anxiety. Like I promised in the part 1 episode, I said I would do a part 2 on pain and anxiety, kind of 2 special challenges. But now I think these each deserve their own episode. So I'm just going to talk about the pain one today and anxiety later. These topics I think are really important to address because many people, maybe even you, come to a practice like meditation precisely because they want to feel relief from pain or anxiety or some kind of stress or distress like that. And meditation can absolutely help. But these factors can also make it more challenging to get your practice started. Sometimes it feels kind of discouraging. And your approach to meditation might need some adjustments from the kinds of basic instructions and advice that's generally given, like in a basic class or on an app or something. So I'm drawing here from what I've learned from some of my meditation teachers who are more pain aware, and also from my yoga therapy training and experiences that I've had working with students in yoga and in meditation who have pain. So today we're going to talk about pain, and later on we'll talk a little bit more about anxiety and emotional overwhelm in a different episode because it deserves its own. And also I am working on bringing some guests onto the podcast to talk about both of these topics because I think it's an ongoing conversation and there's just lots to be said. So let's start this topic off by just acknowledging that some degree of physical discomfort is perfectly normal in meditation. And we see when we first start to try and sit still and like bring mindfulness to our whole experience, that we haven't realized how much tension we're carrying around, right? We often notice things like that, like, oh my God, I didn't realize that I'm this tired all the time, or that I have this much tension in my back or in my shoulders. And there's also the fact that sustaining an upright seated position can be really surprisingly strenuous at times. It's like amazingly hard to sit for 10 minutes even or longer as we extend our meditation time. So it takes time to build the strength to be able to sit for longer periods, and we definitely notice our achy joints and our weak back muscles and all of those things. And within a certain range of tolerability, and as long as we are not actually injuring the body, these kinds of discomforts can be incorporated as learning opportunities in the practice. Maybe that's a little counterintuitive to some, but they actually can teach us a lot about being present with our challenges and how to work with the reactivity that arises. But that's talking about the kinds of aches and pains that go away when you get up from your meditation, right? So this is different than when you're living with a more serious or persistent kind of physical pain. So I want to talk about that second scenario, the kind of pain that doesn't go away when you get up from your meditation, but is with you, and it may be the reason that you're actually looking into mindfulness and practices like meditation to find some relief. It is possible to meditate with pain, absolutely. And there is evidence that mindfulness practice can actually help change our experience of pain in some really positive ways. Because mindfulness meditation is about recognizing and accepting our experiences as they are, like everything from sounds to sensations to thoughts, the pleasant, the unpleasant, the neutral experiences, all of it. This can help to shift the mental emotional experience of pain. And it also can help the body learn to relax around the pain and to create less secondary tension, if you will, which tensing up around an initial pain experience often makes the pain a lot worse. Mindfulness can help us become more aware of our thought patterns, like the tendency to have anxious thoughts about what this pain might mean for our future, for example. So we can learn to be less caught up in believing every negative story that runs through the mind. And some studies have shown that mindfulness can actually change how the brain processes pain and how sensitive you are to pain signals. So that's really significant. And there's some research that suggests mindfulness meditation can alter both the pain intensity and the perceived unpleasantness of the pain. So that's a big deal. And I'll put a link in the show notes on my website to an article that summarizes quite a bit of the research if you want to click through to the actual studies that I'm referring to here about some of the benefits of mindfulness. So I'm just touching on that because there are a lot of possibilities for both psychological and physical benefits, which means it might really be worth learning mindfulness practices, even though it can be pretty challenging at first for anyone, but especially if you have pain and if your tendency is to kind of over-focus on the pain. And for some people, what happens when they sit down and try to get quiet and let go of all the other activities and distractions is that the pain is what really rises to the level of attention. And that's very understandable. And you can understand why one might question that, right? Why do I want to do that? So it takes some extra effort and care to really learn in meditation how to shift the attention to something else, like the breath, which is probably, more neutral and a lot less compelling than a pain sensation is, right? So this is a little bit extra challenging. So the first thing I would say, and you've heard me, if you've listened to the podcast, you've heard me harp on this before, but it bears repeating, especially here, that we need to take care of finding a posture that works. If you want to do your meditation sitting, maybe consider sitting in a chair. Seriously. I know sometimes we resist that, but sitting in a chair could be the difference between actually benefiting from meditation or just struggling on the floor. Lying down can also be a good option. Absolutely. However, the challenge with lying down, as usual, is staying alert enough to be present. But it can be a really great way to encourage more ease in the body, and which, more ease in the body encourages the mind to settle as well. So that could be a great option. But, just in general, I think it's really important to get what you need, especially if you have pain. But get those extra cushions or, anything to make the position comfortable enough and sustainable enough so that you can actually benefit from the meditation. Also know that you can move if you need to during the meditation. Yes, we want to encourage a sense of stillness in meditation in general, but this is not something that we force. It's not artificially holding ourselves stiff and frozen. Think of it more as an embodied calm that can emerge when the conditions are right. So that sounds maybe a little more slippery, but one of those conditions that might be right is when the body is not super agitated because we're forcing it to sit still when it actually needs relief. So that the sense of stillness can naturally emerge when there is more comfort. And a wise and mindful choice to move in the meditation is really different than indulging in fidgetiness, right? And if you're meditating with a group of people, it's considerate to try to move really quietly and not be just like flopping around over there, distracting people who are trying to sit still, and being as considerate as possible about that. But you can move with mindfulness, and you can choose to do that in a wise way. And it can be really different than the kind of like fidgeting that we discourage. Sometimes meditation teachers will encourage you to try to be still and even to sit through discomfort and tension, kind of like I mentioned before. That can definitely have value. It is totally legit in the right context. But if you are someone who lives with a heavy pain load, it's a very different story. So I would encourage you, when you need to shift your position quietly, mindfully, slowly, especially if you ever feel like you're doing potential harm to a part of your body, or if you're getting overwhelmed by the intensity of what you're feeling. Because that's not the way. That's not the way to more mindfulness and benefiting from the practice. Let's talk a little bit about the teaching of the second arrow. I think this will kind of shed some light on all of this. But the teaching of the second arrow is one of the Buddha's teachings. And it's an analogy that can help us to see how certain attitudes we're holding or assumptions or habits we might have that can be really understandable can also actually make the pain experience more difficult. So this is from the Salata Sutta on the second arrow. When touched with a feeling of pain, the ordinary uninstructed person sorrows, grieves, and laments, beats their breast, becomes distraught. So they feel two pains, physical and mental. Just as if they were to shoot a person with an arrow and right afterward were to shoot them with another one, so that they would feel the pain of two arrows. So the two arrows, the physical and the mental, two kinds of pain. There is a distinction being made here between what we might refer to as pain and what we might refer to as suffering. So pain is the initial strike of an arrow, the harmful event, or the unpleasant physical sensation. It's the unavoidable thing that has happened. And suffering is the next step. It's the mental turmoil that follows. Think about that, right? Do you think it's possible that distress in your mind could be creating some or much of what you experience as suffering? How is that contributing to your pain experience? Some teachers explain this concept as like kind of a mathematical formula of suffering equals pain times resistance. And this does go along with what some of the research has been pointing to that I mentioned before, that mindfulness could really impact our mental emotional relationship with pain and even how much intensity and unpleasantness we perceive in it, the distinction between the physical experience and the mental experience of it. So when we are encountering pain in meditation, we want to acknowledge it. We don't try to ignore it, actually. Not in mindfulness practice. When you get shot by an arrow, you need to take care of that, right? There may be something you need to do to take care of that. Mindfulness meditation is a practice of including whatever is true in our experience, even the unpleasant bits. But we want to avoid shooting second arrows if we can. We want to avoid getting lost in the experience that we're having. So when you're actually meditating, this looks like trying to not simply focus on the pain itself all the time. We want to choose a main anchor for the meditation, and that should be something that's more neutral, that's not painful. The anchor could be your breath. For some people, that works great. It could be being aware of non-painful areas of the body. It could be mindfulness of sounds in the environment that you're hearing. It could be your metta phrases, if you're familiar with loving kindness practice. And like a sound or like thoughts, pain doesn't actually have to disappear in order for you to practice. Just like we say, you don't have to clear your thoughts to practice. You don't have to be in a perfectly soundproof environment to practice. They don't disappear, but think of it as more of a foreground background shift. We have a foreground and a background in our awareness. So when we choose an anchor or a home base for the meditation, we place that in the foreground. Like we're bringing the breath into the spotlight of our attention, or whatever the anchor might be. And then we allow any other sensations or experiences to move into the background. And then whenever a pain sensation or a thought or whatever jumps back into the foreground, you take a few breaths with it. That pain sensation, perhaps. You kind of acknowledge, you breathe with it. Oh, pain sensation. Bring some kind of awareness to it. And then see if you can loosen your grip a bit and shift back so that your anchor returns to the foreground, coming back. And you do this again and again. And it is really important, I think, to keep coming back to something that is not the pain, to remind yourself that there are aspects of your experience that are not the pain, because otherwise the mind can get kind of unbalanced and fatigued from really focusing in on this unpleasant sensation. And when we're able to spend more time with the neutral anchor, we get to rest the mind. We get to sort of settle and stabilize the mind. We get to see that there's more here than the pain. And we strengthen our ability to move our attention where it's helpful and to know we can actually move our attention where we intend. Other times it might be really useful to bring in a technique like rain to facilitate being with the challenge of pain. RAIN, R-A-I-N, like precipitation, rain, is an acronym for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture or non-identify. Depends on the teacher which N they use at the end. Nurture or non-identify or not personal. These are common interpretations. I think they're all good. So when you practice RAIN, you go through a step-by-step process of recognizing the experience and naming it, like, oh, there's an unpleasant sensation in my knee. This is what's happening right now. And so just by doing that, you're already bringing mindful awareness to it. Just simple, recognizing it, maybe naming it, acknowledging it. The next step is the A, allow. And so here is where you give yourself permission to relax around the experience as best you can, to stop resisting that it's there, or at least to kind of suspend the impulse to change it. How about that? So allowing. We recognize, we allow, and then we investigate. So that can be like exploring what makes up the unpleasant sensation. Like, where is it in the body? Is it hot? Is it cold? Does it feel tight or sharp or heavy? Does it move? Is it pulsing? Does it have a pounding quality? How big is it? Like, could I draw a circle around its borders? Does it stay the same? Does it move? Does it change bit by bit? Take a few minutes and kind of explore these different dimensions of the experience. And that all could help us to see if there's any gaps in the intensity of the experience, and to kind of dissolve the sense of this pain being something that's solid and permanent. So that's really helpful. And then you move on to the N, which can be recognizing that the sensations in your knee are not personal. They're not out to get you, not out to torture you. Might seem like it. And you are not alone in having experiences like this, that there's a kind of a shared human experience that you are experiencing as well. And here is where we encourage ourselves to identify less with the struggle. It's less about who we are, and it's something that is happening right now. The N can also be nurture, which is where we can bring in a form of self-soothing, like putting a hand on the heart or putting a gentle hand on the painful area, or saying some calming words or phrases, something like that. So that's RAIN, rain, in short. And you might want to find a guided practice, a guided meditation to try rain if you're not familiar with that process, because it's a really good way of being with something like pain, but staying in the present moment with it and not getting lost in the typical kinds of thought and analysis that we might do. I do have one guided rain practice in the Move to Meditate library. It's more geared, this recording is more geared towards being with emotions, but it also would work for being with challenging sensations. And I'll link to it in the show notes if you'd like to try that one with me. And you can also Google rain practices. And there are lots probably that you can find online, especially with teachers like Tara Brach. Tara Brach is really known for this particular technique. So if you went to her website, I bet you would find some really good rain practices. Lastly, on this topic, I will suggest that another option for your meditation could be metta, loving kindness practice, or compassion practice. These could be great for finding a way to meditate with pain. I did 2 recent podcast episodes on how to practice metta, so those will explain more of the nuts and bolts of loving kindness metta practice. So these kinds of meditations are excellent for times when you can't seem to focus on the breath or whatever you wanted your anchor to be. And that's when you could maybe shift to a practice of bringing kindness and care to the difficulty of your experience. So you could recite metta phrases, and that can be a really wonderful way of meeting the pain with awareness, but also soothing your system around it, and also giving your mind something wholesome to do around it. So I hope this gives you some ideas and some starting points. If you're curious how meditation might help, if you've been thinking, I can't meditate because I have pain, and I'm also hoping to bring on some guests to the podcast to talk more about this too. If it's hard to figure out, if you're listening to this and you're kind of wondering how to implement some of these suggestions or how they might apply to you in your particular circumstances, it really might be helpful to work with a meditation teacher personally who has some experience themselves with pain and can coach you, or they have experience coaching people who have pain. So you could feel free to contact me for individual coaching or classes, or if I am not the right person for you, I can maybe help connect you with someone else who has a certain specialty or connection for you. So I encourage you to look into this. If you've listened this far, it might be something that you're interested in, and I hope that you find the resources you need and that you feel encouraged to look into things and give it a try. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you as always for listening to the podcast, for sharing it where it might be helpful, and take good care until next time, and I'll talk to you soon. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend and/or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.